Good afternoon, Georgia. After being away for quite a while because of unfortunate things that happened to my PC, I'm back and today I have a very special guest once again. Um, my guest today is Dr. Robert Falconer-Taylor. He used to be the veterinary director for the UK Centre for Applied Pet Ethology. It was the first organization in the UK to develop government regulated courses to degree level, specifically in companion animal behavioral training. Um, these days, he's lucky he's retired, but he's still consulting all over the world. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us today.
That's my pleasure. That's my pleasure. I will correct you on one thing, George. I'm not retired.
You're not retired. Okay, we men never retire. We retire when we're dead, I think.
Absolutely. No, no, no. I'm now doing what I want to do rather than what I have to do.
Oh, that's
That's,
brilliant.
that's the difference.
That's fantastic. So you're all over the world consulting and that sort of thing. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, mostly remotely now. The beauty of the internet.
Yeah, that's
So you can
changed
get
the
a lot
world.
more done without running around too much.
That's good. Dr. Taylor, I'm going to ask you a few questions that people ask me that I think an expert like you in the field would answer better than I could ever, because I haven't got your experience and knowledge, definitely not. So, if you don't mind, I have a few questions that people ask me after I um, added or put a video online where I tested
Yeah.
prong collars and shock collars and that sort of thing.
Yes.
So the first question that the person asked me is, I talked about emotional stuff, emotions and that thing as part of the video as well. So the person asked me, how can you differentiate between a behavioral problem and the emotional problem? When do you know when what's what?
They're one and the same thing
Okay.
because without an emotion, without some kind of drive there is no behavior. Behavior is just the end point.
Okay.
So but what we as humans do is we then judge the valence of that behavior, i.e., is the dog feeling good? Is the dog feeling bad? Is the dog happy? Is she chasing sheep? Is she in pain? From how she behaves. But of course, that is an inference, and that's the problem because you can ask a human how they feel. We can't do that with dogs, so we rely on behavior. So behavior is our um, the way that we actually interpret how the dog is feeling. But assuming that we all agree that dogs are conscious and they have good and bad feelings like we humans do. And certainly all the evidence suggests they do.
Okay. How do we know that? What evidence is there to suggest that dogs can be angry, can be sad, can be happy? How did they reach those conclusions?
Well, again, the only way you can finally test that is actually by asking them by verbal report. But certainly, if you look at the way they behave, right the way across the animal kingdom, and even now, the latest Declaration of Animal Sentience, which was in New York, I think, last year, has now declared that shellfish are conscious.
Oh, wow.
And the same thing, when we talk about consciousness basically is the same thing as emotion, being able to experience good things and bad things and have that subjective feeling of good or bad. If you're not conscious, then you don't have those. So they're kind of one and the same thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But things particularly like cetaceans, octopuses, octopi, it's octopuses, it's not octopi. They are now declared as sentient beings,
Oh, really?
and so there is a big move against boiling them alive and cutting them around, and shellfish as well, things like lobsters.
Yeah.
So it makes us rethink a little bit about how we judge these things. But dogs and cats for sure.
Okay.
All the evidence is there, and mice, and any kind of mammal, reptiles, but we can't fit the final little bit to the kind of proof by saying, can we actually ask them and have a conversation?
Yeah.
But we can communicate with them clearly. Anyone who has dogs and cats or other pets clearly sees how they interact with us and how they enjoy some things and they don't enjoy others. And for me, that's good enough.
Yeah.
And the other important point here is that because we cannot categorically say they do, um, we need to adopt the precautionary principle, which is Jonathan Yates. And what he says is that if you don't know, then we need to assume that they are, because if we're wrong, it doesn't matter. But if
Yeah.
it's the other way around, we assume they're not and they are, but we treat them as if they don't, and so we can treat them and abuse them and all that sort of thing. That's the worst of the two
Yeah.
cases. So it's
Agreed.
better to assume they are.
Definitely. I think consciousness must be one of the most complicated subjects ever because nobody seems to understand it. What makes you
No, well,
conscious?
I mean, there are teams working on it now,
Yeah.
trying to actually find what's called the neural substrates,
Yes.
which are the bits of the brain that actually produce it. And you'll know because you would have written, your own South African Mark Solms. You'll know about his work, and he
Yeah.
says it's all in the limbic system
Yeah.
and the base of the brain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. And he follows Panksepp. But the fact is that consciousness is something which is distributed all over the brain.
Yeah.
So wherever you look, you'll find bits of consciousness because it's made up from the whole matrix of all those neurons.
Yeah.
It's not particularly cited in one place or another.
Yeah. That's
But it's
really
complicated. It's
it
there, but we kind of don't know how it works.
is extremely complicated. I'm
Well,
not even going to try and go there.
the only thing we do know is that it is soluble in alcohol. So if you drink enough alcohol, then you lose consciousness. So it somehow dissolves or with an anesthetic,
Yeah.
it
Gee whiz.
disappears.
I must start
That's about
drinking.
the only test we can do with it.
Oh boy. Yeah. No. That's another thing. I'm not going to go there. Okay, thank you. Another thing that people ask me, oh yeah, I found something interesting. Um, Somebody asked me, um, in humans, they say you are what you eat. Is that the same with dogs? How can food influence behavior? And something that I found, I actually worked with a dog, and he
Hmm.
was on a strictly raw diet. He was on a high protein diet, and he was overactive. He couldn't sleep at night. He was pacing. He was panting. He was humping. He was doing all these sorts of things. And as an experiment, I suggested just putting him on a different diet, balanced diet with,
Yeah.
enough proteins and carbs and vitamins and minerals and all the rest of it. And after about a week and a half, the owner contacted me. The dog started to sleep at night. He started to settle down. He's not humping that much anymore. So just by changing his food, it made a difference. Um, so how important is a diet for dogs?
As important as it is for us. I think one of the big problems that I see in dogs. Dogs are basically scavengers, as you know. We bring them into our lives. I used to live in East Africa, in Kenya, and we used to feed the dogs what we ate. So they didn't have any kind of special diets.
Mm.
My mum went and bought them bones and stuff and head meat from the butchers. So they ate that. And they had all the vegetables and stuff that we were having. So we had a big pot in the kitchen and it was all mixed up and all the fat and everything else. And they thrived. And I think one of the problems for me is that we've now got these competing groups of people who swear that diet, you have to have the dog on this diet, you have to have the dog on that diet, it has to be all meat, or it has to be vegan or vegetarian, or it has to be, some other combination of those things. And the idea of a commercial diet being terrible is another thing that gets flagged up time and time again. My experience as a vet dealing with gastrointestinal problems in dogs and cats for 35 years is that what you feed them is really important. And it's not the nutrients necessarily in the diet, it's just what suits them as an animal.
Mm.
And sometimes we found that some of the cheapest commercial foods did those dogs really, really well. You put them on something more expensive and they get horrible diarrhea and they're eating grass and they're unwell. Um, and they make bad smells and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, if you think about what a diet is, what is it? It's protein, carbohydrate, and fat, plus
Yes.
some vitamins and minerals.
Mm.
Whatever diet you eat, your digestive tracts and the digestive tracts of dogs, because we're all omnivores, break it down to the same things, which is protein, carbohydrates, fats.
Mm.
So the gut doesn't actually know what it's been fed, or at least the bloodstream and the organs have no idea what they've been fed. You have the amino acids being taken from the proteins. They can only enter the blood as amino acids, and your cells and tissues don't know where those amino acids came from. They could have come from a piece, a vegan diet, an insect diet, a complete diet, a commercial diet. They don't care. So I think there's an awful lot of mythology. It's become a kind of religion, hasn't it? Where people think about diet. But for me, it's whatever suits the dog. And you're absolutely right. Always change your diet if you have a behavior problem with restless dog and that kind of stuff. Particularly if they're eating a particular thing. And I'm not keen on all meat diets for dogs because dogs are scavengers.
Yes.
You look at most dogs in the world, 80%, 85% of all dogs in the world are free range dogs. They're free living. They don't sit there eating raw food all the time. They're eating human shit. They're eating whatever they can pick up around, licking out nappies, licking out waste from human food waste and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Dead animals and stuff. It's a really varied diet. And so I think that's the kind of key.
Yeah, I think the belief that dogs are directly descendants from wolves is actually creating a bit of a problem there. And because wolves are primary meat eaters now, the dogs must be on the raw diets, that sort of belief.
Yeah, but bear in mind that wolves also eat the intestines and the head and the coat and everything else.
Yes.
And their prime prey are herbivores. And what are the herbivore guts filled of? Rumen and abomasum and all that. It's actually full of grass.
Yeah, there you go.
So they get their full, meat and two vegetables, don't they?
Yeah, no, definitely. No, that's a good answer. That's a good point.
The only obligate carnivores are cats, felines.
Yeah, we understand cats. Anybody in the world, they're weird. They're weird creatures.
Yeah, well, they are. They're not little furry dogs. But
No, they're not furry dogs.
They have evolved as obligate carnivores.
Yeah.
So they don't have the same guts as we do. They don't have the liver to metabolize these things.
Yeah.
They have essential requirements for a lot of the nutrients, whereas us lot, dogs included, humans, as omnivores, we basically manufacture a lot of our own stuff.
Yeah.
Out of basic ingredients.
That's it, 100%. Another question from somebody. Okay, we know now there are 7 core emotional states for dogs, thanks to Panksepp and his work. But what about things like people in dog classes come along, they tell you, no, my dog is stubborn, or jealous at home, or spiteful. Is it possible for dogs to actually feel those kind of emotions?
They're really secondary, aren't they? If you follow the kind of Panksepp model, which bear in mind, Panksepp's 7 emotional systems are a model. They're not fact.
Yeah.
And we know that in science that all models are wrong, but some are useful. And clearly what Panksepp has done is he's laid out and also come up with a lot of neuroanatomical evidence as well that there are these centers in the brain that produce these 7 systems. But there's a lot of other stuff, and lots of other taka that gets thrown in there as well. And we then, as your brain evolves and becomes bigger and more complicated, you can start to have tertiary emotions. And tertiary emotions are things typical of humans, which are things like jealousy, revenge, resentment. Now, I've never seen a dog that has exhibited the kind of cognitive processing that would resemble anything like having a grudge on something and holding a grudge and then going back some weeks or months or even years later and causing harm because of that grudge. I think humans are the only species that do that. I think that's been seen in a few primates, but never in dogs. And the reason for that is because they simply haven't got enough cerebral cortex for that. It's not there, which is why the work that's been done on looking for empathy in dogs hasn't really found much evidence of it at all. They form strong social attachments with humans, of course, and with other dogs, but that's not the same thing as feeling empathy. And I know that because, let's put it this way. When I was in veterinary, the dogs used to come to the surgery with me, And I would have patients in there that, and dogs that had terrible accidents, road traffic accidents, and those sort of things, and were in there suffering with a lot of pain and discomfort. Clearly very uncomfortable dogs.
Mm.
My dogs didn't turn a hair, didn't bother them at all. Whereas if you went into an A&E department in a war zone and you saw all those bits of torn up bodies and everything else, you would feel terrible. You'd
Yeah,
have a huge empathy for them.
different reaction. Yeah,
No, dogs just don't have that.
yeah,
And I know that people will say, "Oh, but you're wrong. There are all these videos on YouTube of this dog rescuing another dog off the motorway and all those sort of things." It's something that we will see examples of on YouTube channels, but it's not something that we consistently see within the dog population. So whatever that dog's motivation is, I have no idea.
yeah,
But I don't think it's empathy.
yeah. It might be something totally different. We just don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah, and I think we need to be very careful. Again, I come back to my precautionary principle. I would prefer to assume that dogs don't get spiteful, they don't get jealous, they don't go out of their way to harm us. I would prefer to think that they don't, and the evidence suggests they don't, because if I'm wrong and they do, then it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. 100%.
No, no. But if you do it, if you do it the other way around, and in actual fact I assume that they do have those things, then that does matter because I then punish them like I might punish a child or a human being for being resentful or spiteful, when the dog has no idea of the meaning of spite or resentment.
Yeah.
So it's another one of those things where it comes back to the precautionary principle.
I also think people tend to misinterpret body language from dogs and facial
Yes,
expressions. They
yes.
see fear as being submissive or feeling guilty and that sort of thing. So I think that's also a contributing factor to all this sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got so many facial muscles. There are only so many configurations of a face.
Mm,
If you take a pug or a Rottweiler or a Staffordshire Bull Terrier, they've hardly got any face at all.
yeah.
They're not particularly expressive. Whereas you
Mm,
take a dog like a Labrador or a Spaniel, they're
yeah.
much more expressive
Yeah.
with the snout. So we can only infer, but there are certainly a lot of autonomic things that we can see within the face with the eye, wide eyes and the whites,
Yeah.
and
Well.
the flat ears and all these sort of things, and the tail down. So we
Yeah.
can infer a lot from those,
Mm,
but more complicated emotions we can't.
yeah.
And I think that's where the Pankset systems come handy, because we can relate to something like the dog being happy and pleased to see you because their face is pulled back and they're
Mm,
smiling and they're panting and they're wagging their tails. And we know the difference between that and a dog that's clearly frightened of something.
yeah.
Sort of
Definitely.
thing.
I think Pankseps work is a good baseline
It is,
for
yeah, it is.
everything. It's
Yeah, and if you're a behaviourist, it's a good starting point because you can explain it to owners. You can
mm,
say, right, it's only 7 things you have to remember,
yeah.
plus pain, and you can draw pictures because it fits perfectly with the ladder of aggression and what we know as the body language of dogs. It fits perfectly with that. So that's why I like it as a model.
Yeah, no, definitely. I actually can't see a behavior as doing stuff without Pankseps work or without mentioning or knowing about Pankseps
Yes,
work.
yes.
It's that's important. Okay. Okay. A funny question from somebody.
Mm.
Okay, we always say when we wake up and we're in a bad mood that we woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Is that possible with dogs?
It's mood state. Mood state. So it's basically how you're feeling generally. A dog that is suffering from a chronic undiagnosed pain condition would be a classic example.
Yeah.
So there are so many dogs now with arthritis, and that's getting younger and younger and younger, and it's become a big thing over here in Europe. We have a big conference actually coming up next April, I think it is, or March, 4-day conference on just pain in dogs
Oh,
over
wow.
here, and you can join it for free. So if you want to sit in on it, you're very welcome to join.
So I would like to
Um,
share the link. That'd be cool.
yeah, well, I'll send you the details over, and you can stick it on your thing.
Yeah.
You've missed the early bird thing, which is £75 for the 4 days, but you can watch it for free,
Yeah, that's
and
great.
there'll be a lot of stuff in there.
Yeah.
But the fact is, we know that chronic pain has a huge impact on mood state, and chronic pain also interrupts sleep.
Yes.
So if you haven't had a particularly good night's sleep, your general mood is low because you've got this chronic pain that's
Mm,
irritating you and getting you down and getting in the way of you feeling happy and just enjoying yourself. you're going to feel a bit pissed off when you wake up in the morning.
Oh
I,
yeah,
you know,
like
I don't blame them. I know the feeling.
yeah, me too. Like yesterday, I made cement with a spade. I couldn't get up this morning because of a backache. I was not in a good mood.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, there you go. So it's perfectly possible. It's about, the
Yeah,
quality of the night's sleep, the quality of your life as a whole.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
yeah, and it really comes down to a life worth living. If we're punishing dogs all the time, and they're living in a kind of a human boot camp where they can't do anything of their own volition, they've got no kind of control over their own lives.
Mm,
I would wake up quite a lot of mornings feeling pretty pissed off, to be honest.
same, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I will get to that punishment story just now. Just another question from somebody. Play,
Yeah.
interaction with dogs and owners, playing and interacting. How important is that for their welfare?
They're very social animals. And what we've done through the process of selection is select animals that are really super social. But they're
Mm,
social as, dog-dog sociality, but they're particularly dog-human sociality or social species. Play is hugely important.
mm,
And again, it's one of Panksepp's seven systems, isn't it? He's got the
yes.
play system there with oxytocin and endorphins and all these kind of things. And there is a big, big body of research on looking at denying animals affiliation. And if we look at something like separation related anxiety, which is a similar kind of thing, because you're denying the dog interaction with people to an extreme where you're separating them off,
Mm,
it causes a lot of damage in the brain, in lots of areas of the brain. And what it does is it makes that animal much, much more vulnerable to stressors.
mm,
So if you have an animal that is in chronic pain and or has separation problems and or is being um, is trained and is subject to using shock collars and things like that when he or she is out for a walk with the owner, i.e. a very militarized, controlled um, behavior during the day, all those things will conspire to make everything else much worse. And it reduces the threshold of resilience, so you become much, much more vulnerable to stresses.
yeah,
So, yeah, it's hugely important.
yeah. I totally agree with that one. Okay, now for the great debate.
Mm,
Um, oh, I don't know. Since I've been involved in the dog business, always been a fight between the balance trainers, the old aversive trainers, and then the force-free trainers.
yes.
Now, a while back, I made a video where I actually tested the shock collar on myself. I put it on my
Mm,
neck,
yes, I've done that.
and please send me the video. I want to see if you had the same reaction than I did. I almost fell off my chair. The thing at the shock collar had 100 settings up to 100, and I put it on one. And when I zapped myself, I could feel the muscles in my neck tensing up. I was actually being pulled by that shock, so I didn't go any further. But I put it on my arm up to level, I think 20 it was, and it was actually hurting. It was really, really painful. And my muscle contracted quite badly.
Yeah.
So now, after I made that video and published it, a few people actually contacted me and said, I'm talking rubbish. Um, Although the dogs get trained with shock collars and that sort of thing, they're still happy because they still wag their tails on walks, they still do this, they still do that. So there's an ethical side regarding using this stuff. But besides that, why might dogs still enjoy stuff when they're being punished by a shock collar or a prong collar?
Because they sit somewhere in the middle. They're not punished to the extreme of you might be when you're being tortured or interrogated, and so your whole mood state completely breaks down, and you're in a state of defensive depression, if you like. You withdraw, and you can't interact with anything. They're not as happy as they could be. They're in some middle ground, and the way I explain this, I don't want to get into debates about whether shock collars are damaging or whether they're not, because it's like arguing about religion, isn't it? Whether God exists.
Yeah.
There are going to be schools of thought who believe that and schools of thought who don't. I can only go on the evidence. I'm an academic and I
Yes.
look at the evidence. If you look through the history of psychology and neuroscience, going right back as far as you can think of, in actual fact, it goes back to the Greeks and the Romans with people like Galen. They were debating these kind of things, the meaning of pain and the meaning of suffering, etc., etc. Um, then working forwards with experimentation, people like Hess, who was experimenting with cats and putting electrodes into their brain and looking for reactions like defensive rage, etc., etc. The new body of neuroscience over the last 20 or 30 years has focused primarily on chronic stress and depression in humans. And the way they've approached that is to use animal models. You obviously can't use humans for experiments, so they use animal models. And they're predominantly rodent models, so it's mice and rats predominantly. And the way they do that is not by using things like the kind of foot shock that you might use in torture and the kind of punishment you might use in torture, which is really extreme, makes the animal shut down. They want to push the animal as if that animal is living a kind of really stressful life. And the paradigm to look up is chronic, unpredictable, mild stress. So you look that up in Google, look it up in Google Scholar. There are more papers published about that than just about anything else. It's the model, or one of the models that's used in research. And what it is that it subjects rats, basically, as the name suggests, it's what's written on the tin, to unpredictable chronic mild stress. So you subject them to little stressors on a kind of daily or 3 or 4 days a week rotation. So one day their bed might be wet, and another day their cage might be tipped up, so it's difficult to sleep. Another day they might be given their food from a dispenser, which is really hard to get the food out of. Another day they might have the smell of something they don't like put near the cage. Another day they might be isolated from their group for a little bit. All these things in themselves don't add up to much, but together and over a period of time, they're enough to knock these rats from a state of just being, pissed off at all these things going wrong, to going into becoming anxious and upset, to falling into a state of depression, where they start to withdraw from interaction with life. And that's when it becomes kind of extreme. But there's lots of stuff in the middle where they can still interact with their friends, they can be happy when they've got the right kind of things and they've got their mates around them and they have a game with their mates. Same with dogs, you'll see them, they'll play when they have the opportunity. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're not in a state of chronic mild stress. It all depends on what else is happening around them. If they live in a house full of kids, for example, and you've got loads of teenagers and they all have their friends over, and the dog has nowhere to sleep because there's no basket anywhere, the dog is constantly being interrupted by all these people going backwards and forwards and interacting with the dog. The dog doesn't have access to be able to go out and find himself somewhere peaceful where they can just lie down and sleep. Remember, dogs sleep an awful lot, 17 hours a day or something like that. That accumulated with having a shock collar used when the dog is out walking, even though the dog is happy when they're walking. You have to look at the whole ecogram of that dog, if that makes sense. And in COPE, as you'll know, we talk about hedonic budgets.
Yes.
All these things have to be in place, and all of them have to be positive, and we need to minimize the negatives. So it's about balance. So this is the argument I put forward. It's by using aversive training methods, however mild they might be, even if most of the time it's just a negative reinforcer, i.e. it's a buzzer that goes off in the collar, or a sound signal that goes off in the collar without shock, that's still enough to stress the dog, because it's a conditioned negative reinforcer, isn't it?
Yes.
And so it still arouses the dog and makes it feel stressed, and it releases all those stress hormones. So my argument is that you're much better off training a dog without using aversive techniques, because you're not risking them going into states of chronic mild stress. And again, it comes down to genetics, it comes down to how the dog was bred, it comes down to past experiences. As you know, all these things matter. Breeding. So if you've got the choice, don't do it. which is why we don't do it with people anymore, which is why we don't beat kids up and give them the cane at school, because people are much more aware of these things. It's illegal to punish people in prison, for example, using torture methods or social isolation or any of those sort of things, solitary confinement. You only find those in places like Guantanamo Bay, and places where they're kind of off the radar, if you like.
Yeah.
So for my money, it's just not a good idea to be using these tools. All the evidence suggests against it, and I know the argument that they're not using huge quantities of shock. The dog seems happy, and dog goes out walking quite happily. The fact is, you're adding to that negativity. Pool of negativity highlighted and which is highlighted demonstrated so well in these chronic unpredictable months. That's the literature I ask these people. That's the literature I ask these people to go and look at.
And continuously doing this will actually cause the dog to shut down in the end. He will become miserable.
In the end,
He
it's
will
question
not
of
allow
balance.
training.
It's question of balance. And you get a dog that's getting older, they're getting creaky joints, they're having other kind of age-related kind of changes. Becomes a point where you're simply going to tip the balance over, and that dog's then is going to become miserable. The big problem for me, the big welfare problem, is that people then just think that dog's getting old. Oh, he's slowing down. He's not so keen to go on his walks. But that dog really is in a state of really poor mood state, and they're like a depressed person. It's not nice. And then they're not having the interaction with the humans. So you talked about play and social interaction. They're very sociable animals. The kids have moved out the house now. They're older. They don't play with the dog as much as they used to. The parents are busy. They're getting a divorce. You can just see all these things coming into play that are just additional stresses that we kind of forget to look at in a dog's life, which is why I think doing these hedonic budgets with the whole thing, you've got to dissect the whole family apart and go in there like a psychiatrist.
Definitely. If we just can explain hedonic budget, it actually focuses on the natural and individual needs of the animal. And we also try to work in premotor patterns, that sort of thing, into the hedonic budget to activate seeking and all the rest of it. So that is very important as well to their welfare.
You can think of it as taking the PANCSEP systems and making sure that the dog has plenty of engagement with the good ones and as little engagement as possible with the bad ones.
Yeah.
So fear and grief and those sort of things, rage. Try and avoid those emotions and stick to the seeking and the play and the care, etc.
No, definitely.
And pain, of course, I call that the 8th system.
Yeah. You're actually one of the authors of the original EMRA, aren't you?
Mm-hmm.
The emotional assessment, mood state assessment, and reinforcement assessment program, EMRA.
Yes.
You and Professor Neville did that?
Yeah, well, it was originally Peter Neville who came up with it.
Oh, okay.
Professor Peter Neville came up with it originally, and then I joined COPE, and then I was with COPE, and we were using that, we developed that over the years, and it's now become MARA.
That's brilliant. I mean,
so it's evolved. So it's the same thing, and it's still based on PANCSEP model.
Yeah, I think any behaviorist without this book will have a problem.
That's one. Yeah.
It's a brilliant book. Last question: where do you think all this is heading? All this research regarding dogs and everything. We still don't really understand what it's all about. Do you think there will become a point where we know everything?
Nah. Impossible. I think we're going backwards with where the internet works and social media works nowadays.
Yeah, social media is a real problem with everything.
I think to be fair, I've worked in quite a lot in countries, European countries, and certainly the recognition of dogs now is spreading much further. It's spreading. And I'm actually quite optimistic. Because I'm actually quite optimistic because if you think about the number of people that are now talking about dogs and emotions, I think that's great. I think that's great. When I started out, which was 1990, something like 1990, something like that. The idea of not using choke chains and negative reinforcements of trained dogs really was negative reinforcements of trained dogs really was what everybody did. I did it myself. And I did it myself. I never used shock collars or punishment or beating or anything like that. But it was still the kind of the idea of negative reinforcement to rather than to encouraging dogs to do a behaviour of their own volition. And use reward-based bribery. So things have changed a lot doing that. And I think things have changed a game changer in our understanding. And I think Panksepp is such a game changer in our understanding because it's such a I am optimistic, Factory George. So I am optimistic. I know in our Factory George, to be honest, not. I know in our things have before I said I'm not. We're always going to have things have moved forward. We're always going to have these groups, and that's fine. Debate differ, and that's fine. Discussion is always a good debate, and discussion is always a good thing. That always keeps us on our toes. We think about as long as we think not just dogs. That's what's important. Not just dogs have responsibility for. All animals that we have responsibility for as the dominant species on the planet.
Yeah, I'm starting to worry about that. I don't think we're that dominant anymore. We tend to be the villains in the world these days.
Oh, but
anyway,
we are the dominant. We are the dominant species. We are the dominant species.
Yes,
we are the dominant species.
We're also the creator of all the problems.
Yeah, well,
that's another problem.
Well, that's because we're too smart. Because of our smartness, because of our smartness, because of our ability to feel hatred and revenge and all these sort of things. Our good nature is there, and I think the fact that we have all these awful things that we do as humans. Dogs, cats, and other animals don't torture people. They don't have psychopaths or any of those sort of traits. It's a very human condition. Those things. It's all borne out by being empathic and enjoying the suffering of others. Schadenfreude in German, isn't it? We enjoy the suffering of others, and you will not see that happen in anywhere else in the animal kingdom. It's pretty unique to people. But the other side of the coin is that we are incredibly empathic, and we are, we're good. We're a good species. We're just screwing things up at the moment.
Yes, big time.
And I always like the idea of Franz de Waal that if you filled up an aeroplane, a jumbo jet full of chimpanzees, hardly any of them would be alive when they got to the other end of the trip. If you flew them from UK to Cape Town, most of them would be dead and there'd be a couple still alive. But the fact is that we as human beings are so cooperative, despite the fact we're sometimes so shitty to each other, that you can pack us all into a plane. Make us really uncomfortable with COVID and traffic jams and whatever. Stuff us in a big plane in a tube and fly us across the world for 9 hours, and we're all still alive when we get to the other end.
Yeah.
So there's something about us which are incredibly intolerant and well inhibited, and it's that side of human nature I like to celebrate rather than think about all the shitty stuff we do to each other and to destruction of wildlife and those sort of things.
Yeah. Oh well.
So that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's just a pity that's these ugly things happening in the background as well. People torturing animals. They do all sorts of things, hanging dogs up in the name of training. I know. It's just a pity about that.
Yeah, I know. So you just have to see past that. The problem is, it's if you think it's kind of yin and yang, isn't it? I've got to have. It's the nature of our condition.
Yeah.
And I'd rather just be on the side guys, to be honest.
Yeah, no, definitely. Me too. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Falconer-Taylor, it was such a privilege and honor having you here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, George.
So much for
my pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you so much for everything, and we'll chat again soon.
Absolutely, yeah. I can talk about these things all day.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, sir. Keep well.
You take care now.
Okay, bye.